The world as we know it has changed. We would like to think we'll be getting back to normal, but the reality is whatever normal was is not going to be in the future. Think of the things that have changed already. We've gone from stores to home delivery, from office to work at home, from cash to digital money, from face to online, and from shaking hands to masks. Churches are finding their ministries turned upside down. We have questions about what worship will look like in the future. How do we do communion when we can't get together? How do we take an offering when people don't want to handle cash? And what about the ways we take care of each other? All of these are major questions as we think about the church and what it's going to be like in the future. For 8 weeks, we're going to tackle these questions by looking at the church in Ephesus. References to Ephesus are found in the books of Acts and in Ephesians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, and the book of Revelation. What is quite unusual is that we have almost 40 years of history of the church in Ephesus, from its very beginning in Acts to the message it received many years later in the book of Revelation. Ephesus is located in present-day Turkey, and as you can see, it sits across from Greece and the city of Corinth. In 52, we find the Apostle Paul in Corinth. He is exhausted and worn out from all his travels. It's now almost 22 years since the crucifixion, and Paul is now the leader of the early church. In Acts 18 through 19, we find these words. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them, and they worked together. In this passage, we find out that Paul met two fellow believers, Aquila and Priscilla, who had left Rome because the Emperor Claudius had begun a campaign of terror against the Jews and Christians in Rome because they refused to worship him as a god. Paul found that they had much in common, including sharing the same trade of tent making. In 1 Corinthians 2, we find Paul's mental and spiritual state. Let's see what it says. When I came to you, brothers and sisters, I did not come proclaiming the mystery of God to you in lofty words or wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ, and him crucified. And I came to you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. It seems that Priscilla and Aquila were believers who were able to help Paul. They had a history of ministry with the Christians in Rome and now in Corinth. They became so important to him that when he left Corinth, he took them with him to Ephesus. Let's see what it says in Acts 18, verses 18 through 19. After staying in Corinth for a considerable time, Paul said farewell to the believers and sailed for Syria, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila. At Centuries, he had his hair cut, for he was under a vow. When they reached Ephesus, he left them there. So what was so important about Ephesus? In Paul's time, it was one of the most important cities of the Roman Empire. It had a Greek theater that could seat 25,000 people. That's a huge number of people by the standards of the ancient world. It housed the third largest library that rivaled the Library of Alexandria in Egypt. Its two-story facade still dominates the city. Most importantly, it had one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Temple of Artemis, also known as Diana the Huntress. Artemis was the daughter of Zeus and Leto, and the twin sister of Apollo. The temple brought considerable prestige to the city of Ephesus. Acts 18:19 through 21 says the following. But first Paul himself went to the synagogue and had a discussion with the Jews. When they asked him to stay longer, he declined. But on taking leave of them, he said, I will return to you if God wills. Then he set sail from Ephesus. As Paul prepares to leave Ephesus, two actions sum up his ministry at this time. First, he leaves Priscilla and Aquila in charge of this new ministry in Ephesus. It would be up to them to share the gospel in a way that would attract new people to the way. Second, he goes to the synagogue and tells them he will return. And what was the message that he shared? Let's look at Ephesians 2. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are what he has made us, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand to be our way of life. To sum it up, let me share with you these words. Churches start with people who find faith in Jesus Christ and commit to loving one another. Their faith attracts others. Their prayers, acts of mercy, and gratitude in the midst of strife become contagious. I want to encourage you today to become contagious because of your faith. Think of the things that Paul went through, how he suffered for his faith, but yet he was able to connect with others because of his faith. How Priscilla and Aquila comforted him and gave him hope that he would be able to recover from all that he had gone through. And how later on Timothy became a great friend of his, Timothy who became part of the church in Ephesus as well. As we conclude, we'll be listening to the tune from Blessed Be the Tie That Binds. As you listen to the music, I want you to think of all the people to whom you are tied to. Friends, family, members of the church, and others around this world. Be comforted knowing that we are all in this together, and knowing that Christ is there to strengthen us, to encourage us, and give us hope.